All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our, I think it's now our 8th or ninth Under the Dome session. We really enjoyed these conversations and learned a lot and made a lot of progress with a lot of the policies and bills that have been filed and are going to be heard starting next week. And I just want to take a minute to thank our mobility partners, which are our members that are our highest invested partners. And I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors for the series. They are EHRA, Goodman Corporation, Memorial Hermann Hospital System, and H&TB. We really appreciate your support for the series. I don't want to waste any more time, so I want to go ahead and get started. Welcome our guest for today. We're really delighted to have Representative Lina Ortega with us from District 77 from El Paso. And this is her third term in the House, I believe. And she's currently serving on the Higher Education Committee in the House and Transportation. So we are really delighted to talk with her about what she's seeing and kind of as the bills start to get referred to committees and assigned and there's going to be hearings, it's a great time to talk about all the different policies that are coming through. So with that, Representative Ortega, please take over.
Thank you and good morning. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the Under the Dome series, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. And as you just said, you're going to be focusing on transportation issues. This is my third session, and this is because it's my third session, it's also the Speaker Phelan is the third speaker that I have served under. There's always a period of adjustment with a new speaker because you're not certain how the House is going to be run. And I think that this session we can all tell as members that it's very different from previous sessions. And Speaker Phelan has actually done a really good job in ensuring that the House is run safely under COVID time, as we all call it. We've got changes in protocols in terms of the way we are operating. The one big difference between this session and prior sessions is that there's reduced amount of time on in-person communications, and there's because of safety measures. And my office is always open for discussion with anyone on Zoom meetings, and I have taken some in-person meetings at the Capitol in a safe manner. The issues, even though it's COVID time, still remain the same. We've got basically about 80 days remaining in the session, and I was very pleased, happy that I was assigned again to serve on House Transportation. This will be the second session that I've been serving on this committee because I strongly believe it's a really important issue for the state of Texas. I'm also serving, as you said, on higher ed. This is the first time that I'll be serving on higher ed. I have filed several bills covering a variety of topic areas, such as expanding healthcare access in the state of Texas, gun safety, consumer protection, and economic development. Specifically with regard to transportation, there's two bills that I have filed in this area. First one is House Bill 156, and this bill would allow El Paso County, subject only to voter approval, to impose an additional $10 fee in order to fund long-term transportation projects in our community. If this plan if this bill passes, any projects that are funded through this additional fee would have to be approved by our MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're not the only community that has filed this type of legislation. And so I'm hoping, because it's a more challenging time in terms of funding, that this bill makes it all the way out and gets signed by the governor, as well as all of the additional bills by other members. The second bill dealing with transportation is House Bill 3399, and this would allow TxDOT and the U.S. Department of Defense to enter into a memorandum of understanding for transportation services on military property. This would uncomplicate the current practice that's occurring in the state of Texas, and it would be beneficial to not only those not only to those serving in the military, but beneficial for all motorists in the state of Texas, because it would lead to cost savings overall in the state of Texas. Um, as you also said, we are going to start hearing bills next week. And currently, from my numbers, the Transportation Committee has already been referred about 65 bills. And I'm sure that there's going to be many more coming our way. So even though this is a very different, unusual session, I don't think, based on what I've been seeing, that there's going to be a slowdown in the number of bills that we're going to be listening to. And hopefully there won't be any change with regard to the amount of legislation that gets passed during this session. So I'm looking forward to starting up on hearing bills, and I'm happy now to answer any questions that anybody may have, and as well as listening to any opinions with regard to the hot topics that are right now in front of us.
Well, I will say there are no strong opinions in this group at all. So, so no, we definitely have opinions, and that's what's been great about some of these exchanges is I think both we've learned and our representatives and senators have learned from kind of this exchange of ideas and opinions. So I appreciate you offering, kind of putting that out there right off the bat. Well, first of all, we want to thank you for not only being a leader on transportation, but also taking the initiative and filing the legislation. There has been several of what we call the local option bills. And just for clarification, the $10 fee that you were talking about, that is assessed for vehicle registration. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Currently, there was a law that was put in effect that allows 5 counties in the state to actually have a vehicle registration fee increase that goes to transportation projects. El Paso is one of them.
Okay.
And that didn't require voter approval. It was something that was done through the county commissioners. This one, it would increase it an additional $10, but would only go into effect if the voters in my community approve it.
So we've talked about these types of bills in our prior conversations, and it is hard to kind of gauge the temperature on what the response is going to be on these bills. I think in the past, local option bills they have been, quite frankly, very controversial, but now it's been said quite clearly that if there's any chance, you have to tie it to this voter approval. You have to add that element into the legislation. So with that caveat, and it looks like many of the others that have been filed have that caveat as well. Do you feel that there's a greater chance of success with that on there, or do you think that it's still going to be put in that bucket of local option and kind of a slippery slope with fees and taxes?
That's a really good question. And I guess last session, I filed the same bill, and I was able to get it out of committee. I actually got it on the House floor, and it was approved. It passed. Where the bill stalled and was on the Senate side.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that I'm just as successful this session. But this bill is actually going to be heard next week. And I know that there's been 2 other bills that have definitely, I know that have been referred. I know that others have been filed, but we're going to wait for the referral to the Transportation Committee. And again, there shouldn't be concern in terms of having it go into law, because this one requires voter approval. So it's going to be at the wish of the community as to whether they believe that this is something that that they're in support of. And that's where I think that we will know if we're able to get this bill signed into law, if this community is willing to pay that extra fee for long-term transportation projects. And that the positive thing is that these are this is money that would be used in the county, in our county. And so it's I'm hoping we get it passed.
And you mentioned that the legislation that passed that encompassed the 5 counties, which was set to be set by the commissioners, right? That was the first iteration. Those 5 counties, can you, if you do, I don't off the top of my head, I think Bear County was one of them.
That's correct.
Okay. And yeah, if you can kind of.
And I think the the Valley was another one. I'd have to kind of go through some of the paperwork that I have to look and see what were the others. But I also know that Representative Benjades filed from San Antonio, filed the same bill last session. And so we were both trying to do anything that we could to be able to get it out of the Senate side.
But your bill, but this specific bill is strictly for El Paso. It does not include, right? It's kind of now everyone's just kind of individually filing for their respective areas versus bracketing multi-county is what.
That is correct. Okay, so the 5 counties were Cameron, Hidalgo, Webb, El Paso, and Bear County, and that legislation for the optional vehicle registration fee was created in 2007, so it was a while back.
Right. So it's been some time. No, I think that's great, and I know that there's been other different versions also tied to RMAs, depending on how the funding is allocated. So we in the Houston region do not have an RMA, but your point about tying it to MPO approval and all of that, I mean, that seems like the checks and balances are all there, right? So it would seem that would be easy again to get out of the House committee onto the out of the House floor. And but you're accurate too, and I think the majority of these bills that I'm seeing are coming out of the House. They're not coming out of the Senate. There might be a few, but there's definitely more coming out of the House. So it'll be interesting to see if the Senate wants to make any movement on that issue.
That's correct.
Going forward. So I think this is a great conversation because we're talking about looking for additional ways to fund transportation. I think we see the writing on the wall that it's getting more difficult to find new funding streams. Raising the gas tax is a very tough conversation politically. Indexing it is even tough. We're seeing a lot of really great legislation for both of those issues, but we've been told that that's a pretty hard road to go down. But the piece that is pretty does seem pretty amicable for conversation is the electric vehicle fee conversation. And so you see the House and the Senate both having versions of addressing that, what we call kind of an equity issue. So can you, from your lens, I know Chairman Canales has introduced quite an expansive package that also goes back to invest in EV infrastructure. The Senate side is a little bit different. Can you kind of assess your thoughts on the alternative fuel fee for electric vehicles?
All right, there was legislation that was filed last session on this very policy, but it was not successful. It wasn't something that ever came to the House floor. I think that with the number of vehicles that are increasing, electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, I think that there may potentially be more movement. And there was a bill that was filed by Representative King, and he has filed the same bill this session. And that bill specifically sets an amount of vehicle registration fee that would have to be paid for electric vehicles, which is $200. For hybrid, it would be $100. I don't know if there's a companion bill on the Senate side, and I do. What I do know is the reasoning is very simple. Having owners of these type of vehicles pay a portion of their use of the road and for infrastructure because most motor vehicle owners pay that by when they buy gas.
Right.
And because you can't, obviously you don't need gas for electric vehicles, you're going to be charging them. Uh, for the hybrid, you're going to use some gas. You're going to have to buy some. So that's why the fee is lower.
Right.
I suspect that there's going to need to be a study, and I'm not sure if a bill has been filed that actually studies as to what would be the appropriate amount.
Mhm.
I personally don't want to discourage people from buying these environmentally friendly
Mhm.
means or modes of transportation, because I think that having these type of vehicles on the road is really important. But I also believe that we've got to make sure that we do have the funding necessary to keep our roads, the funding that we need for them, maintenance and everything else.
Right. Yeah. And I know that I've seen a few additional ones kind of trickle in. We had worked with Representative Martinez last year on a version that he had filed where the money would come back to the counties, kind of collected and come back to the counties. And I see he's filed that again this year. I think that just popped up last week. And so I think what I'm hopeful for is that there is all of these different versions, and then that just launches into a really great conversation where there can be some common ground. I know that there was a study that was to identify how many of these vehicles are on the road. Representative Israel had gotten that through last session. But your point about kind of assessing the fee that is tricky, and I think people kind of land differently on it as to what's fair, because there is perhaps a person that purchases one of these vehicles and then doesn't drive it very much. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's a different kind of way to measure usage than actually going to the gas station and filling it up and knowing that. So I think we look forward to these hearings as they kick off, and kind of watching how the conversation progresses from the House and then into the Senate. Um, we did talk with Senator Schwartner, who has his version in the Senate. And from his vantage point, I think he was really focused on uh, the fee structure and
Mhm.
not necessarily not necessarily taking money from the fee collection to put it towards charging stations, which is, I know Chairman Canales's version is a little bit different in that way. So, but it has legs, and so I feel like that's we're hopeful for,
Yeah, no,
for that, and it's certainly more than there was last session. Last session, it was really just a very beginning part of the conversation. So, um,
correct.
we're hopeful for that.
And kind of like what I tell people, I mean, it takes 2, 3 sessions to actually get somewhere,
Right.
majority of the time with the bills. And so it could be that we're definitely going to make some movement in that area. To what degree, extent, it's a wait and see. But we obviously need to move in that direction because the technology is there and people are starting to buy those type of vehicles, and we need to continue to pay for transportation.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. I want to switch to another topic, another legislation that's gotten some traction in the House and the Senate, and that's the Texas Mobility Fund, which has been kind of, I would say, on a pause, but they're looking at I guess, opening that to possibilities. I know Chairman Canales has legislation, Chairman Nichols has legislation related to that, and at the same time, there's also a couple of bills in the House and the Senate that are addressing kind of the TxDOT's formula and how things are funded. And from my understanding and from our conversations, the Texas Mobility Fund is the more flexible fund. And so it's been advised to say, okay, well, let's focus on that and expanding those options in the toolbox versus kind of taking and trying to repurposing the highway fund. So can you share your thoughts on that and how you think that will kind of pan out for the session in those discussions?
Well, at the time the mobility fund was closed, I was not serving in the legislature, and it was actually done by a member of my community. It was done by former chairman Pickett that
Yeah,
closed it back. My
right,
understanding was he
right,
closed it back in 2015.
right.
I am supportive of exploring, of opening up different tools
Mhm.
for funding in the state of Texas because we need it. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that infrastructure, maintenance, repairs of roads throughout the state, that we've got to do something to have the tools available for new construction as well as just plain old maintenance. So I'm familiar with Chairman Canales's bill, and I think that it is important to open it up again, because we need to be able to have funds available for transportation projects. So I am hopeful that because there is a shortage of funding, not as severe as the commission thought was going to occur, because earlier this year, we were actually not this year, last year, we were hearing that there was going to be less monies available. And from everything we know now, I know during the commission hearing and when we had Executive Director Bass speak to us, there is CARES money funding that has actually helped improve the situation. And we also know that there's going to be monies through a federal highway type of funds that are going to be available to states. But it's still not enough. I mean, it wasn't enough last session, and I think opening up different avenues or tools available to fund transportation is important. So I would be very supportive of Chairman Canales's bill, and so yes, I think we need to do it. And I kind of wish that bill in 2015 had not come through and become law back then.
Right. Well, and I think that was I know that was kind of a reaction to some kind of tightening, I guess you could say, and I think there was some mistrust there. And so I think we've turned that corner. And so I think it is a great opportunity to reopen that conversation. In that same line of discussion has also been Representative Armando Wally has introduced, I can't remember the number, but I know in the House, Senator Miles, it's SJR 40. And it does take money from the State Highway Fund and put it towards other modes. And so in some conversations, these have been aligned together because it's saying that it's preferred to put it towards, look at the mobility fund because that's got more flexibility already. We're not taking from the highway fund. Can you share your thoughts on that and how you think that will pan out in kind of hearings and discussions in the House?
All right, Andrea, let me make sure I understand the bill because I'm not familiar with it. When you say put it in other modes, what type of other modes?
So it would be, bike, pedestrian, transit, those are public transportation. Right. So that's
transit.
Right.
Okay. Well, not being yet familiar with the legislation, I mean, I think again, placing funding in mass transit is important. I can't really comment as to the avenue of doing that, but I can say that funding mass transit projects is something that the state needs to be looking at. And I'm aware that the federal funding is actually focused on mass transit projects, which I think is important. We've got to be looking at that as well, not only just building and constructing roads, but we've got to be looking at other means of allowing people to be able to get around and do other things that are also good for the environment.
Right. Agreed. And I think one of the other components that we were looking at, and I'm going to ask Barry Goodman on here because he's my expert on this issue, but exempting the sales tax cap from transit agencies was an idea that was floated. Representative Julie Johnson, I think she has since modified the bill a little bit, but it was a really, in my mind, a novel idea because we are capped, with the sales tax. And again, it's a little bit of a local option conversation, pending voter approval. Could we decide as a locality, a county, to, tax ourselves to fund transit needs, which is, it's a rural and it's an urban issue in many cases, especially for the Houston region. And so that was one kind of component of trying to find an avenue to fund transit. And then I know recently we had a conversation, I think he just joined us, Dylan Matthews with Chairman Canales' team from the committee, looking at expanding TERSs for counties. And currently they're much more restricted. And so can they use that? Can they use those funds? And I'm going to let Barry take over and share his thoughts and his expertise on that, because that was a great conversation that we had. I think it was Monday.
Okay.
Hi, Representative Ortega. It's nice to have you with us. We appreciate everything that you're doing to help Texas and transportation. And I have fond memories of El Paso and had worked there since 1980 for about 30 years on various projects.
Oh.
There was a young congressman at the time who had just been elected to the House. I think his name was Ron Coleman.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up being head of the at that time the House subcommittee on Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation, and brought a lot of good things to the El Paso community. And so I appreciate El Paso and the challenges that it has. El Paso, as other major urban areas in the state, impose up to a 1% sales tax, as you know, to fund transit. Sun Metro participates in that, as do other transit authorities in the state. But because of the growth surrounding El Paso and other urban areas, and because the census keeps growing urban areas larger and larger, so that in the case of El Paso, Sun Metro serves those areas that help pay for the way by the sales tax it imposes. There are many parts of the community that are underserved because they cannot tax themselves, even if they want to extend public transit, because virtually every political subdivision, particularly in large metropolitan areas, has reached the ceiling of 8.25%. So the idea that we have is that if we could exempt transit sales tax from the cap, that would then provide the opportunity for many communities that would like to tax themselves to become part of a regional transit authority to vote to tax themselves in. And the way the authority legislation works, they can opt in on a adjacent county by county basis and on a precinct by precinct basis through a vote within the area that county commissioners approve to pursue inclusion in a regional transit authority. So that's a long-winded way of saying that another tool in our toolbox to help communities generate more money, at least on the public transit side, would be exemption of the sales tax from the cap. That's one area that we've looked at. Andrea mentioned county TERSs, which is another interesting area that got me and Carol Lewis and some others on this call very, very interested, because that would enable counties, generally cities and other political subdivisions have tax reinvestment zones. And I believe that El Paso established one of the first in the state when the legislation was adopted. But that only is useful within the geographical boundaries of cities. And outside of those boundaries in counties, that tool does not exist, or the tool to create the ability to issue bonds on revenues that are generated by TERSs does not exist. I think counties can create TERSs, but they can't, they have no bonding authority. So that's another area of interest. We're looking for every tool that we can get. I was very interested in your discussion about registration fee increase for mobility, and wanted to ask you a question. Does that $10 registration fee for mobility include all modes of mobility?
It includes, when you say all modes, it includes all vehicles. It would be any type of vehicle, and that's the way it's being applied now.
But can you use the money, say, to support public transit as opposed to more roadway development?
The current law, the way it is it's the monies that are collected from it is for use by the county only. So it depends on the projects that the county are actually funding. the bill that I have filed would be monies would go directly to the MPO and the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And those funds, yes, it would definitely include it because we deal with all kinds of projects. And the nice thing about the MPO is that we have elected officials from all levels of government. We've got city representatives, we have the mayor, we have the county judge, we have representatives from the smaller rural communities within our county. And so it would, if this legislation gets passed. Currently, on your first question, no, because it would be only for county projects.
Okay. Well, what's interesting about the registration fee opportunity that you and others, I think it was Andrea, the one for Brazos County, is that Schwartzner?
Senator
Yeah, that would be dedicated to mobility within those counties. What I find interesting about this conversation is I was unaware of this prior legislation that identified 5 counties, as the representative was saying, to proceed with a local option registration increase. And I want to do some research on that bill to see if maybe one way to approach this is to get some other counties on that bill that could then come back next session with their own specific legislation to increase registration fees by $10, something like that.
And I mean, the amount of money that would come from that is a substantial sum that which is important. And the benefit again is that it goes to that specific county where it's collected. So the people that are benefiting from it are the people that are residents of that county. The majority anyway benefits there.
And I think, you know, I'm not sure, I apologize, I don't know the MPO, Representative Ortega, for your area, but I know for ours, it spans, what is it, is it 13 counties or 10 counties for the MPO, Barry? 10?
It's 8. It's
Oh, it's
8.
8.
It's 8
Thank
for
you.
transportation,
Is it 8?
13 for other things. Yes, 8
Okay.
counties.
Yeah, 13.
Okay, so I think that would, if that's where the money would funnel to, then certainly you would need probably a support from all of those counties. Would be my guess. I'm not sure how you had structured it, Representative Ortega, for your MPO, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, no, and I mean, these kind of bills or legislation can be structured in different ways. This one was structured for the funds to go through the MPO, who places priorities on projects, and it's a process where all levels of government are represented, and it's a very fair way of deciding which projects take priority. But again, the prior law, the decisions as to how the money is going to be used are made by the county.
Okay. That's helpful. That gives us a lot to work with. I know Barry and I will be, and others on the call will be following up rigorously on this. Since I heard Dr. Lewis pipe in, I'm going to tip it to her. She is the chair of the Gulf Coast Rail District here in the Houston region, and there are a couple of bills that I know that she would like to talk about.
Good morning, Representative Ortega. Great to see you.
Good morning, Carol.
The bills that Andrea is referring to is Gulf Coast Rail District here is an organization that has sort of 2 focal purposes. One is to, can you hear me? I see.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of problem, so I'm I'm just making sure. Go ahead, please.
Okay, well, let me look. I'm going to switch mine because I don't know if it's true or just my perception that my voice comes out better when the microphone is on the right-hand side. That doesn't make any sense, but I just switched it. But
Thank you.
we represent most of the counties, most of the 8 counties, not all. And our focal points are 2. One, to do grade separations with railroads, and then secondarily to do passenger transportation. So we've got 2 bills that we want to come forward. We actually have folks working to get them filed. They're not actually filed at this point, but we're trustful and hopeful that that will happen next week. 2 bills. One expands our modes. And so basically our enabling legislation only allows us to do commuter rail. And so the first bill opens for us to do bus rapid transit, other high technologies, automated bus. That's the first one. The second one would hold our energy company here, CenterPoint Energy, harmless if we were to use some of their right of way for public transportation. So those are
Okay.
the two things that we've got coming forward. I guess I'm hopeful because they're not asking for any money. So as we've talked to other folks under the dome, we say, well, the thing we've got in our favor is that there's no financing attached. But hopefully that would be something. We're not sure whether either of them would actually end up coming to transportation or going to other committees because they're constitutional in nature. But that said, if you were to see them, I hope that would be something that you would feel that makes sense to you for us to be able to do down here. And I'm sorry, let me pause there because I do want to hop in on that TRIZ thing too.
Okay, with Kiro, if they're going to be filed, my understanding is that today is the last day for filing legislation. So I suspect that your bills will be filed by today, and then going through the process, the speaker will decide which committees that they are assigned to. And you are absolutely correct when you say if they're bills that don't have a fiscal note attached to them, they have a better chance of going through the process and being successful. What you mentioned just on quick reaction, it doesn't seem like they are anything that would be controversial. So so hopefully they will be successful.
I thank you for saying that because someone's up there working on our behalf. I know he was meeting with folks Wednesday actually, to get things filed. So I need to follow up and see exactly what happened with that. The second thing I'd like to just kind of follow through on is that transportation reinvestment zone piece. So just my understanding is that it's transportation reinvestment zones, which is a little different from tax increment reinvestment zones. And so the legislation already exists for the legislation already exists for the TRZs, but the Attorney General had ruled that counties could not establish them. They could only be established through municipalities. So this particular filing opens that up for counties to also do the TRZs, it's TRZs. So again, just kind of clarification. It's different from tax increment, it's transportation reinvestment. And I just got a note, I may have come to Aunt Andrea too, from our executive director who said that Boris Miles is going to file for us.
I think it's smart, and as was pointed out earlier, El Paso was one of the first communities to use TERS, and we are still using it. And we have discussions with the city when we are trying to find creative ways of funding, again, priority projects for this community. And we show that this community is willing to invest and become partners with the state by using TERS as a way of providing additional monies for priority projects. And you're right, it's my understanding that there was a legal precedent in the past that said that counties were not didn't have that tool available to them. And I think that, again, because we have to look at creative ways to find additional sources for funding, that because TERS bring in more money, because it brings more economic development to that area that's being focused on, I think that counties ought to be able to have that opportunity through clarification of law to be able to do the same.
Thank you so much, and we really appreciate all you're doing because you are really helping us with all of the interest that you have in those items that help us with transportation and particularly public transportation. So thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Good talking to you. And again, I really do enjoy getting opinions from on specific issues dealing with transportation. It helps me.
Most appreciated.
I know that I think Michelle Masood was on here from Dannenbaum. Michelle, did you want to ask a question about tolling? I think he was still on. I can ask for him. Maybe he's not able, maybe he stepped away for a bit. Well, so let me ask then, we've covered tolling in some of these discussions. It's a pretty fiery issue for some. There's been some bills filed for the cessation of tolling, all kinds of different versions of either expanding tolling or limiting it. So can you share your viewpoint on tolling and how you think those conversations are going to, really flow through the session in the Transportation Committee?
I know that there was bills that were filed last session dealing with tolling. I know that there is no statute or there's no laws that prohibit tolling. I think it's more the climate that we've been made aware of during last session where state leadership was not supportive of tolling. I would hope that that this type of approach doesn't continue, because I think that first of all, and dealing with local control, I think that each community should have a say so as to whether it's something that the community is supportive of. And going back to, I mean, there's a lot of local leaders, there are organizations, there are, and specifically like the MPO. I know that MPOs, semi-quasi-governmental type of organization, are not advocates, but they can certainly express opinions as to whether or not, depending on the project and where the tolling could potentially take place, whether it's something that this community needs. So I think it's a necessary tool for large transportation road projects. And so I am supportive of tolling, doing it the smart way in terms of bringing in private investment in essence. And I know that last session, we did deal with in communities or roads that actually have tolling, that we dealt with legislation that went into effect with regard to make the process easier on the billing side. So really, I think when it comes to tolling, there has to be local buy-in. And that, again, going back to local control, it should be the community that decides, is this something that we want to set up and we're supportive, and otherwise potentially this kind of project cannot take place, because you also have to maintain the roads once they're set up. So
Right.
we'll see how this session goes on tolling. I don't think, again, it's a wait and see, because I know you're right. There are bills that have been filed against tolling to prevent them, and there are bills in favor of it. Last session, bills that were anti-tolling never actually made it to the House floor.
Right. And I think, I mean, that's my sense is that the extremities of those will be this, it will be similar, that there will be hearings and discussions, but that, it likely will not make it to the House floor. There's just, I think because there's just not a standard model that's statewide for tolling, right? Our tolling, was actually enacted by voters, our tolling, and HECTRA. So that's very unique versus some other areas. And so I think it's really hard to just kind of have a blanket approach to cessation of tolling, especially if it makes sense for a community, that there's a lot of local support for it. I see that Jay Crosley has joined us, which was great timing, because I was going to switch to safety. That's another hot topic for transportation. And there's been a myriad of bills introduced related to reducing speed limits. And I know Senator Zaffarini in the Senate has introduced a version that is more specific to kind of the major urban areas, and then allows kind of the opting in of other localities. And then there is the Representative Celia Israel has introduced a version that is a bit more of a statewide kind of blanket policy for it. I'm going to let Jay take over and offer any more insight on that legislation. I know we've been working on that together and with other community partners.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea, and sorry I was late, and thank you so much, Representative Ortega. And last year you were, I think, a co-author with Rep. Israel on the statewide bill that did pass the Transportation Committee. But this session, there's pretty clear signs that the statewide bill will not be heard in the Senate. And so I think all the advocates are behind the bracket bill, which is Senator Zaffarini's bill. And then Rep. Israel just filed this morning HB 3877, which is a companion to Zaffarini's bill. And so I guess I just hope you can support that. And do you think that this has a good chance or will have the time to be heard in the Transportation Committee and with the rush now that we're on? And what do we need to do to get that bill through?
Could you tell me, Jay, what does the bill do? What is Zaffarini's bill?
So it's actually kind of just like the statewide bill, but it just changes the speed limit on only residential streets from 30 to 25, but only in the 4 biggest cities.
Okay.
And so in a way, it would be like a pilot Safe Neighborhood Streets bill, and the 4 biggest cities who all want this would do it. And then maybe next session, we could talk about the statewide. And there's we're working on adding El Paso and Fort Worth and moving the bracket down a little bit. El Paso explicitly wants it, but Fort Worth is working on that.
Well, and Jay, just to also add, am I correct in saying that there's an option for others to opt in with Zaffarini's bill as well? It's besides the bracketed ones?
Well, no, so we were working on a 3rd local option version that would make it sort of easier for cities to kind of do whatever their traffic engineers wanted and allow for 20 mile an hour. But no one has filed that bill yet. And
I thought that was going to get kind of attached. Okay, I gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So at this point, I believe we're all just going to be focused on the Zaffarini Israel bracket bill and hope we can build support and get them hearings real soon.
Mm-hmm. Jay, you're right. Last session, that was a bill that was considered and it was controversial and it wasn't something that moved as smoothly as you would expect. And I did not know about Zaffarini's bill that brackets it just to the larger urban communities, but that is a smarter bill, in that potentially it would be more acceptable to the members, to the lawmakers. And I was supportive of Representative Israel's bill last session because, I mean, we're all concerned about safety, and small little changes like reducing the speed limit does actually make a difference when it comes to making sure that our kids, as well as everyone in communities, can walk out there without being too concerned. Because I know that even where I live, and it's you would think that people would be more cautious. Sometimes you do see these vehicles that are speeding around neighborhoods. I'm right by a park, and you wouldn't expect to see that, but it happens. And anything that draws attention to making sure that when you're in a residential neighborhood that you have to slow down is important. So safety is really important. And I know that the commission has taken a big interest over the last few years with regard to actually safety on roads as well. And I do believe that we need to kind of continue with research and advancement when it comes to smart technology that deals with vehicles themselves or other means, signs that assist in making safety a priority. So we'll see what happens. And with regard to Zaffarini, who I know is a strong advocate on the Senate side. So we'll see if this session it's more successful.
And Jay, I know City of Houston and others are working with former legislators to kind of help get this through as well. And I think one of the things we talked about that's helpful are stories, right, of people that have really experienced this personally. So if, Representative Ortega, if you know of any, I know that's really kind of the ask, I think, at this point. for hearings and moving forward. It's kind of those stories that will help kind of fill out that conversation as we go forward. So thank you, Jay, for being our resident safety expert. We appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Representative Ortega, for your comments on safety. And there are other bills, and I hope the Transportation Committee can consider and pass several things that will make our streets safer in the coming years. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we just have a few more minutes, and I know we've talked a lot about transportation, and it's been a great conversation. And I know that you have other bills and other passions besides that. And so I just wanted to close out and for us to know if there's other legislation that you have filed that you are really focused on that's a high priority for you.
Well, I think it's really because of what has happened with the pandemic. When I talked about other pieces of legislation, what has gone on in our community, high number of deaths, the problem with the infection rate. So I do have bills that deal with increasing access to healthcare. So there's several pieces of legislation in that area. And also because of what happened in El Paso back in August 3rd in 2019 with the Walmart shooting, I have filed bills that, in my opinion, are bills that are reasonable when it comes to gun safety or gun use. One specific is background checks, because there's a loophole in the state of Texas that needs to be closed, and that those that should not have possession of firearms, we've got to make sure that everyone goes through background checks. And it's not saying people can't possess a gun. It's more that people that do possess a gun should be people that are responsible individuals that have it. So that's one that's really important to El Paso. Another bill that deals with gun safety is that you cannot openly carry assault weapons. If there had been a prohibition that this was actually was carrying that assault weapon, but there was nothing that could be done about it. And that should not be occurring. So we will see. We'll see what happens. I do believe that we will be hearing a lot more legislation than was previously anticipated. So we'll see how things move. I think a lot of it will also depend on how state leadership, how much they're willing to do with some of these pieces of legislation. I know that the Lieutenant Governor has, during our town hall meetings, expressed an interest in having background checks and not having private to private gun sales. So we'll see if he keeps his word on what he told us when he was here in our community. So there are numerous issues. We have a very short period of time in which to act. So I think members right now, we're all really busy and working and seeing what we can do. And it's great that we're already hearing bills. I presented my first bill this week, and I've got several more that I'm going to be laying out next week. And so it's kind of exciting that we've started to work on issues that are important for the entire state.
And we appreciate, again, all your leadership on. I know there's so many issues that leaders at the state have to, in the House and the Senate, really have to, at any given time, have to know a lot about so many different topics. And so we appreciate your work and your leadership. In talking about the hearings next week, it is, kind of the gates are open, I guess you could say, for public testimony and things like that. I know in some cases the committees have been operating kind of differently, but for House Transportation, how do you see that kind of being structured and managed with public testimony, and given kind of COVID and how that works?
There was what we're calling a COVID rule that was passed shortly after we were sworn in January, and it does provide for virtual testimony. And so the chairperson of the committee can invite virtual testimony, and normally the process where that's going to take place is that there's a author of the bill or a
Right.
member of the committee that will ask the chairperson to invite, somebody, say, from Houston or someone from El Paso to testify. There's one thing that I think people also have to realize: when that happens, when virtual testimony is requested, the rule does say that the chairperson has to make a reasonable effort to also find testimony with a differing
Okay.
viewpoint
Right.
on the issue, so that will be a consideration in terms of requesting virtual testimony. But it's available.
Right. Right.
And there is an effort as well. There's been a bill that's been filed to actually reconsider the COVID rules
Of course.
and to do away with them. So we'll
Okay.
see how far that goes. I think we've got we've got a speaker from all indication, obviously is very smart, and
Right.
at the same time is very reasonable. So we'll see how far that gets.
Wonderful. Well, that is the general consensus. People have been very pleased with his leadership so far, Speaker Phelan. So, and kind of has set the tone and the personality of the House very well, very early on. So, so we look forward to tracking all of these bills as they are heard, and supporting you in your efforts. And we really appreciate your time today. And we hope that we can be a resource too. I know Barry and I will be following up on some of the other items that we talked about, and others as well. So we look forward to staying in touch with you and your staff, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.